Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Okay, I'd like to mention that the learning on the second day of Shavuos, and today's learning is dedicated in memory of Chana Rochel, Basachavar Meir, and it's dedicated by actually a very good friend of mine, Herbie and Judy Kaiser. It was in memory of his mother. Okay, we are on Mishna's Pesachim, Parakeh, chapter 5, Mishna Yud, Mishna 10. Karoi v'haitze murav. Okay, so after skinning the animal, after skinning the offering, it was torn open at the abdomen. V'haitze murav, and he removed what the amorim, which are the sacrificial parts, the parts that are sacrificed. Okay, which parts are those? So here on the bottom they bring down certain fats, the kidneys, the diaphragm, along with part of the liver. When the offering was a sheep, the fat tail are all burned on the altar. And these parts are called amorim. So those are the parts that he's now, after tearing open the animal's abdomen, he's removing them to offer them on the mizbeach, to offer them on the altar. Nesanai b'mages, he put it in a bowl, in a plate, and then they were offered on the altar. Now, if we read this Mishnah, we don't know who's doing what. It says he tore it open, he took out the sacrificial parts, he put it in a plate, and he offered it on the altar. It almost sounds like it could be the same person. Now, theoretically, it could. If it was all a kohen, he could be doing everything. But in the case of a Korban Pesach, the kohanim were very busy. And therefore, what was typically happening was that the skinning of the animal and removing the sacrificial parts that don't need to be done by a kohen were usually not done by the kohen. Were done by the person, the owner of the offering. He was the one who went ahead and skinned it and removed the parts. But once you're talking about actually offering those parts on the mizbeach, on the altar, that has to be a kohen. So it could have been that, it was the non-kohen who shechted and who skinned and who cut it open and took out the parts and put it in a bowl. But once you're talking about offering on the mizbeach, which I think would include bringing it to the mizbeach, I'm not so sure about that. It doesn't say that. Yeah, it doesn't say exactly who brought it over, but the offering, putting it on the mizbeach, putting it on the altar, of course, had to be done by a kohen. Next, so now we're talking about a situation where Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, and as you mentioned before, they're going to be slaughtering the Korban Pesach, they're going to be skinning it and everything, and now it's time, really, if it would be a regular day, wouldn't be Shabbos. People would then, after finishing, would have to be done at the Mizbeach, would have to be done at the Beis HaMikdash, they'd go home. And they would roast it on Erev Pesach to be eaten on Pesach night. But it's Shabbos. So there's two issues. Number one, how are you going to carry it home? Can't carry it on Shabbos. You're going outside of a private domain to get back to your house. How could you carry it? Number two, you can't roast it on Shabbos. So what happened? So the Mishnah says, Yazasakat Rishayna, the first group left, meaning they were done, and they left the Azar, they left the courtyard where everything was happening. The Yashua Baharabayas. And they settled at the Harabayas. The Harabayas, we call it the Temple Mount, which is outside the temple buildings and courtyards. The Temple Mount was surrounded by a wall. It was considered a private domain, which one is permitted to carry on Shabbos. So to go from the courtyard to the Harabayas and a wall around it was going from one private domain to another, and therefore there was no problem taking everything into that area. But they had to wait there because they couldn't carry it out of the Harabayas and take it home. Okay, that's what the first group did. Shniya Bachel. The second group proceeded to the Chel. That means the second group proceeded from the courtyard to an area outside the courtyard that was called the Chel. I'm just going to borrow this 1 second. So I want to read how they describe it. Okay. At a 10-cubit distance from the temple courtyard wall was a low wooden partition called Soreg. The area...
What was the word?
Soreg.
Okay.
The area between the Soreg and the temple courtyard was called the Chel. When the second group left the temple courtyard, they passed through the women's courtyard and stopped in the Chel. So when the first group went to the Harabayas, the second group that was leaving the Azara went through the Ezras Nashim, the women's section, and they went out to the Chel, which again was an area of 10 cubits between the wall of the courtyard and this partition called the Soreg. That's where the second group went. Vashlishis b'mekayma oimedes. And the third group stood in its place. The third group really didn't know where to go. So they just stayed in the Azara. The thing is, as pointed out here on the bottom, if they're in the Azara, they can't sit. You're not allowed to sit in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. There's only one person who can sit in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. And that's the king from the family of David. They're the only ones who can sit. So that group, that third group that remained in the Azara, in the courtyard, they had to stand there
all day
until Shabbos was over. Chashcha, once it became dark and Shabbos was over, Yatsu, they left, V'tzalo es Peschayen, and then they roasted their carbon Pesach. Because they couldn't do it Erev Pesach, they had to could only do it on Pesach. So, that was added, that was added to the Seder night. They couldn't just start the Seder, they had to actually first roast the carbon Pesach, and then they could proceed. Have a wonderful Shabbos and a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.